Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How we doing? Spectre here on the 5x5 network. It's a nice night for a fire. It is almost spring-like here where I'm at in flyover country here this evening. And so I think we'll come out from the coves, come out of the house, get away from the old fireplace here as we've had over the last couple months. Perhaps get situated and reacclimated in nature here and gather around a campfire here for the evening. So, as always, gather around, grab your favorite beverage of choice, whatever that may be. Grab a log or a bag chair, whatever. Get up close, stay warm. Probably going to get a little bit chilly down here in these parts tonight, depending on where you're at. But, yeah, definitely a good night for a fire. Hopefully the weather continues this way. The warming trend shows here over the next week or so. I think we're supposed to be in the 60s, probably a good 15 or so, 18 degrees above normal for this time of year. And certainly much better than it was a couple weeks ago with snow flying, so we'll take it. Alright, well, that being said, as you guys file in here tonight, appreciate you guys tuning in over on Twitch. We got a few of you over on YouTube, over on the Periscope side, as well as on DLive. Good to have you guys aboard. And, of course, not to forget about our friends over on the Foxhole app as well. We got a few of you guys over there. Looks like the chat is working over there as well, so good to see you over there as well. Go dog go, good to have you aboard. Nancy L and Schiff Diff Hiss. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know why the old fireplace is buffering. I got good signal here, so not sure if it's the transcoding or whatever on the outbound side, whatever, not sure. But we'll give it a go anyway. Hopefully it smooths out here. Let's see here. Keyframe interval. That's interesting. I'm not sure why that would have dropped, but nonetheless, we'll give it a go, see what happens here. Alright, so on the evening tonight, we got a few articles net I want to cover. Usually on the old Firesides net, I'll tend to cover those that are a little bit more thinking pieces as opposed to just newsy related. So that's what we're going to try and cover here this evening. And so, out of the box tonight is a little bit of an icebreaker. This one is one that was on Zero Hedge a few days back. This one was affectionately titled, where do we go here? This is Mad, or it's a Mad World. And of course, Simon Black does a fantastic job of capturing some of the weird, crazy, nutty, insane stories that are out there over on Sovereign Man, so that's what we're going to start off with here this evening. It says, are you ready for this week's absurdity? Here's our Friday roll-up of the most ridiculous stories from around the world that are threats to your liberty, risks to your prosperity, and on occasion, inspiring poetic justice. It says white people shouldn't translate black poetry. Apparently this is a bad thing now. We can't be doing that in this day and age. You'll get canceled, right? Amanda Gorman, a poet who happened to be black, rose to notoriety after speaking at President Biden's inauguration. She is publishing a book of poetry, which will be translated into Dutch. Gorman chose a female Dutch author to translate her work, but a Dutch activist journalist had other plans. She rallied the woke mobsters to express their disgust that a white woman would be translating the work of a black poet. After the backlash, the white translator pulled out and decided she will not translate the book of poetry. Apparently, to be woke, we have to segregate poetry. So that is story number one in the multiplicity of stories comprised here. Next up, out of Canada. Canada demands solitary confinement for kids exposed to COVID. So, not only on the southern border here, where we got kids in cages, just a return to 44's policies, but hey, at the end of the day, that was purely Hitler literally Hitler, right, under Trump? Well, not to be outdone, Canada is going to go this route, says a regional health department in Canada issued guidelines telling parents what to do if their child has been exposed to a classmate with COVID-19. Health officials recommend that children be kept in solitary confinement for 2 weeks without contact with family members. These children should be forced to eat separately from the rest of the family and wear a mask when they leave their bedroom jail cell. Keep in mind, this is the recommendation if your child does not have any symptoms, has not tested positive for COVID, and simply may have come into contact with someone who is positive for COVID. Sadly, some parents will follow this insane advice and leave psychological scars on their children far worse than anything COVID would do to them. So there you have it out of Canada, and I'm sure it probably gets the blessing of none other than Justin Trudeau. So, school superintendent fired for refusing to perform Wakanda salute. That's interesting. A group of school superintendents in New York City routinely posed for the Wakanda salute at the end of their meetings. Wakanda is a fictional, technologically advanced African nation from the Marvel comic universe made popular in Black Panther and the Avengers movies. But one superintendent, a black Afro-Latina Hispanic woman, thought the salute introduced unnecessary racial division and refused to perform it. She was admonished and told that it was inappropriate for her not to participate in the Black Power / Wakanda / Black Panther salute. Then, after having been employed by the district for nearly 3 decades, she was fired. The reason given was that the school district is moving in a new direction. She later reached a deal with the district to instead be demoted in order to keep her retirement benefits. So, the woke mob is now victimizing black women in the name of racial justice. Makes sense. Carrying on. Gay dad, not diverse enough for San Francisco Parent Advisory Committee. The San Francisco Schools Parent Advisory Committee recently spent 2 hours debating about allowing a gay white male father into the committee. They ultimately rejected him because he did not add enough diversity to the all-female committee. The race-obsessed committee, at one point during the meeting, read off their racial demographics as if they were credentials. I'll give you the breakdown now. Currently, the PAC has 2 African American parents, 1 Asian American parent, 3 Latinx parent, I'm assuming that should have been a Latino, 1 Pacific Islander parent, and 3 white parents. Currently, all of those are women. Clearly, this is more important than the content of one's character. And back up to Canada. Canada Post suspends mail delivery to maskless residents. The Canada Post is a Crown corporation, which means it is a government agency which functions as a private corporation. But it will soon require tax subsidies to function. Plus, taxpayers are on the hook for the agency's more than $5 billion of underfunded pensions. After residents were seen without masks in the common area of their apartment building, the Canada Post suspended mail delivery to the complex. And the apartment complex will no longer receive the government service until all residents wear masks in common areas at all times. There you go. So much for that mask burning party up in, where was it? South Dakota, Wyoming, Idaho, wherever it was, up in the west. Yeah, perhaps they could learn something up in Canada. Seattle shelter offers tax-funded heroin pipes. There we go. A tax-funded Seattle homeless shelter is advertising free pipes to help homeless people more easily and safely use heroin. One flyer at the shelter states, "Smoking is a lower-risk alternative to injection. Give it a try!" And there is actually an exclamation point behind it. Another poster instructs homeless addicts to ask the front desk about booty bumping kits, which is apparently a method of injecting drugs anally. Their tax dollars hard at work. And last but not least, let's fly over to New Hampshire. New Hampshire bill would empower mask Nazis. So if you thought the Karens were bad, wait till this gets into effect. A bill introduced in the New Hampshire legislature carries the catchy title, establishing a criminal penalty for an assault committed against a person who is conveying public health or safety guidance or requirements during a declared state of emergency. That's a mouthful, but it basically says that the bill is intended to outlaw assault against people not wearing a mask, except that's not what it does. Instead, the bill makes a criminal out of anyone who, quote, refuses to comply, end quote, if someone asks them to put on a mask. You can feel all the Karens' excitement growing over their pending new powers. So there you go, folks. A handful of the ridiculousness taking place in various countries, states around this former republic. But it's time to fight back, and we're seeing that unfold, folks. All around this country, the states are stepping up, reasserting themselves. You're seeing the AGs and whatnot all across this country fight against the feds, as they rightfully should. Alright, so let's switch it up again here. Fear is the new smart. This out of the Automatic Earth blog here in recent days. Let's break this one down. It says the Washington Post said recently, the anti-vaccine movement is comparable to domestic terrorism and must be treated that way. While the Guardian had this. When it comes to shifting attitudes to vaccines, it is crucial to distinguish between public information campaigns that seek to educate the public and those that seek to persuade them, said Philip Schmid, a behavioral scientist researching vaccine skepticism at the University of Erfurt. If you don't proactively tackle the problem at all, you'll end up playing catch-up with the anti-vaxxers. Anyway, governments have to work on a parallel vaccine rollout, immunizing the public against science denial. Just that statement alone reminds me of what somebody said. I forget what state this was in, and they were on camera and basically said as much in saying that we have to break their will. Yeah, that's what behavioral scientists typically do. They want to break your will. Just trust us. The government says it's good for you. But the World Health Organization spokesperson, Margaret Harris, said, it's very important for people to understand that at the moment, all we know about the vaccines is that they will very effectively reduce your risk of severe disease. We haven't seen any evidence yet indicating whether or not they stop transmission. And Dr. David Martin claimed it's gene therapy, not a vaccine. One might add, it's not science, it's a sales job. Now, I don't know exactly who the Washington Post refers to when they say the anti-vaccine movement, or that German guy with the anti-vaxxers, but it appears there is a widespread movement going on to promote mRNA vaccines, both by governments and by the press. And we're not supposed to ask questions. Well, I'm sorry, but I make a living asking questions. And I think asking questions is not just everybody's right, it's an obligation. So don't come at me with domestic terrorism or anti-vaxxers, a term that has nothing to do with the topic to begin with. Asking questions is not the same as being against something. In essence, the Pfizer and Moderna mRNA substances are a giant experiment, nothing else. If you can tell me what the logic is behind injecting soon hundreds of millions of people with something about which the World Health Organization itself says, quote, we haven't seen any evidence yet indicating whether or not they stop transmission, end quote, try me. And how you get from there to issuing, quote, vaccine passports, end quote, is as puzzling as the entire propaganda campaign. Who's engaging in science denial here? In its core essence, an emergency use authorization is unscientific. A vaccine used to mean something that relied on, mostly, dead virus material to get your body to produce immunity material. When mRNA does, in this case, is force your body to produce an S1 spike protein, which is toxic to your body. Someone compared it to sticking a USB stick in your body, but one you can never take out anymore. Actually, it's more like sticking such a USB stick into almost every single cell of your body, forever. Can it be successful? Maybe, but we have no idea. No research, no clue what mRNA does in the long term. There's a lot of concern about what it might do to our immune systems. So, lots of questions. But we're not allowed to ask those questions, because then we're domestic terrorists. Or maybe we can ask them, but only after getting inoculated. There's an eerie similarity here to the banning of Huckleberry Finn, The Odyssey, and Dr. Seuss. We apparently cannot be trusted to form our own opinions anymore. And if we apply the same rules that got Mark Twain and Dr. Seuss banned, how on earth can the Bible remain politically acceptable? I'm sure they'll get to that yet. And the press helped shape this new world, and big tech becomes Big Brother. There's nothing either journalists or 20-something social media guardians like more than to tell you what you can see, hear, read, or think. And I bet you never imagined that's what George Orwell imagined, or Mark Twain for that matter. There is no real difference between banning books and burning them. The way this is broadcast to us is that the mRNA substances are safe, based on the fact that not too many people have died from being quote-unquote vaccinated. But not only are short-term effects not the main worry about them, there are already plenty headlines like this. Injuries reported to CDC after COVID vaccines climb by 4,000 in 1 week. 34 spontaneous miscarriages, stillbirths after COVID-19 vaccination. Danger of mRNA vaccines to elderly. 16 deaths in Switzerland. Norway warns of COVID-19 vaccine risk after 23 die. When you see that in Germany, France, and Switzerland, half of care home workers don't want to get vaccinated, perhaps it's good to ask a question. Or, how about this? About 60% of nursing home staff declined COVID vaccines, Walgreens exec says. About which Whitney Webb tweeted, "Just wondering if people consider the 60% of nursing home staffers and 1/3 of U.S. troops declining the experimental COVID-19 vaccine to all be crazy anti-vaxxer conspiracy theorists." I apparently have to be afraid of what reading Huck Finn or the Odysseus will do to me. My brain, the brains of my children and neighbors. But I'm not afraid of that at all. I think the books will enrich their brains, as they have mine. And I'm confident they'll be able to figure out what is just and right in the words they read, and what is not. I'm not overly concerned about COVID-19, but I do take a cautious approach, which means taking vitamin C and D and zinc, with ivermectin in my near future. But it doesn't rule my life, certainly not as much as the lockdowns in Athens do. And frankly, I'm more afraid of sticking a genetic USB stick that generates untested genetic material in my body for the rest of my life than I am of a virus that is unlikely to kill me. And I guess I'll pause right there and remind folks, what was the statistics? 99.997% chance of surviving. Right? So by now, we should be asking what being ruled by fear for a prolonged period of time does to the mindset of not just individuals, but of entire societies. Well, for one thing, it makes it much easier to censor people's thoughts and actions, to shape their lives before they themselves do it. be very afraid. Roll up your sleeves and don't ask questions. And if you behave the way we tell you to, you may be able, in a year or 2, 3, to return to the old normal, which, unfortunately, absolutely certainly will no longer exist once you get there. Your society will instead look like a war zone because its economy has been ravaged by fear. For one thing, if they allow stores, bars, restaurants to reopen this summer, doubtful, it may well be because they can no longer afford the emergency support for businesses and workers. The very first thing to happen then is mass layoffs, which will snowball into more businesses closing and more layoffs. It's simply all gone on too long for our economies, our societies, and our minds. And if only to help us recover, we should ask questions. It's an obligation. I like this from John Scott Lewinsky on fear. Panic has become a twisted new virtue. The COVID-19 pandemic has warped humanity's mindset, turning fear into an intellectual value. Panic is now the smart choice, and those who reject it are considered dangerous barbarians. Sociologists, political theorists, and the other experts credit the ongoing coronavirus pandemic with forging countless changes in global society. Some are practical, some psychological. Some are temporary, while others will remain in evolving forms. It's difficult to deduce if the most troubling change we're seeing really resulted from the viral crisis, or whether it had been waiting under the surface noise of daily life for full exposure by COVID-19. For the first time in human history, fear is now considered a sign of intellectual superiority, while the choice to resist panic is seen as stubborn foolishness. And if you don't stay locked in your bedroom in favor of going about your life, still masked, scrubbed, and distanced, you're a fool. Even worse, you're a reckless fool who lacks compassion for the people you might infect. Regardless, the underlying theme is crisis and desperation in place of challenge and problem solving. Finally, if we allow a little old-time religion into the fray and check in on the gospel writers, we're told Jesus wept in fear the night before defeating its temptations and facing the crucifixion. Halfway around the world, the Buddha stated, "The whole secret of existence is to have no fear. Never fear what will become of you." The current psychological zeitgeist would ridicule all of those figures or those authors and their protagonists as hasty and brainless for not running away and hiding from a threat indefinitely until it did its damage or decided to go away. Those in the cult of alarm will say all of those references are fiction and COVID is real life. I would motion over to Joseph Campbell and remind them that myths and their fables indicate cultural values. No one ridiculing their fellows for not wearing a mask while alone in their cars, dining outside of their own kitchens, or even longing to get back to their workplaces has any part to play in any stirring touchstone story or in the real-world events that inspire them. Perhaps this new worship of trepidation is another symptom of the coronavirus that will pass. Until then, we live in hope for a vaccine against our 2020 affliction of dull, self-adultery dread. Fear is a healthy and useful natural reaction to events. It can save your life. But it's not healthy for an individual to live in fear for a prolonged period of time. And fear should never take on a mass identity. Entire societies living in fear for a prolonged period of time are highly toxic to their citizens. In wartime, societies are saved not by those who fear, but by the individuals who refuse to let fear lead their lives and turn it into bravery. Because as the Buddha says, The whole secret of existence is to have no fear. Interesting. What you guys' thoughts on that? Is that kind of where we are as a society worldwide? Are we seeing enough folks stand up, be bold, courageous, step out at this point in time? Do we honestly think for 1 second that all of these lockdowns are magically going to lift and that's going to be it and it'll be sunshine and rainbows afterwards? Or do you think that the folks that say, the Klaus Schwabs and company with the Great Reset will just kind of yank the rug back out from under us periodically and just lock us down? They've already tipped their hand, right? They've already shown it by tweet, and then they yanked it back. Do you think that was done on purpose? I certainly do. This is what they want to have. They want to keep you in perpetual fear. That is how populations can be controlled. I say, nay. In any case, let's move out of that one into the next. How the fight over American freedom will probably escalate. That's a piece out of Alt Market here in recent days. Brandon Smith had this to say. Says 3 months ago in December, I published an article titled, "Is the Globalist Reset Failing? The Elites May Have Overplayed Their Hand." I was specifically interested in the development of the pandemic crisis, the lockdown mandates of governments worldwide, the bizarre vaccination campaign for the new and undertested mRNA cocktail, which was rushed out to the public in the span of 6 months, the World Economic Forum's open statements that they hope to exploit the pandemic as a springboard for their globalist agenda, and the public's reaction to it all. I have to say, I continue to see a divergence in what the elites clearly want to have happen versus what has actually happened. If the Event 201 pandemic war game on a coronavirus outbreak held 2 months before the actual outbreak occurred in China is any indication, then the globalists greatly overestimated the fear effect of COVID. So this article is kind of playing off the previous. They predicted at least 65 million deaths from a coronavirus outbreak, but over a year has passed since the pandemic went international, and the official death count stands at 2.5 million, with over 40% of deaths in the U.S. attributed to nursing home patients that were already dying from pre-existing conditions. Removing suspect nursing home deaths from the equation, the death count is probably closer to 1.5 million. Again, if we adhere to official estimates. To put this number in perspective, the CDC states that global deaths from the flu virus peak at around 649,000, depending on the year. Deaths from the flu and pneumonia reach as high as 1.4 million globally per year. Studies funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation find annual pneumonia death stats that are comparable to the CDC's. Yet, we never saw Bill Gates calling for economic lockdowns, mask mandates, and medical passports because of the flu or pneumonia. Why is that? Today, the death rate of COVID is 0.26%, far below initial predictions by globalist institutions and governments. It is now widely proven that the lockdowns did nothing to slow the infection spread of the virus. And now, many areas of the U.S. are starting to experience what the lab coat professionals, see my air quotes behind the scenes, affectionately call herd immunity. Infections and deaths are plunging, and the lockdowns and mask mandates were useless. Like the vast majority of all viral illnesses, humans simply get sick, endure, build immunity, and get healthy. Some of us die, as we always have, and government intervention is not needed, nor is it welcome. This is why large portions of U.S. and European populations are refusing to accept the lockdowns and the vaccines. Why destroy the economy and submit to a potentially dangerous genetic cocktail over a disease that 99.7% of the population is sure to survive? The establishment elites really blew it this time. My suspicion, my quote-unquote conspiracy theory, if you will, is that the globalists announced their reset agenda under the assumption that the death rate for COVID would be much higher than it is. They were expecting something biblical, and instead they got something not much more dangerous than the flu and pneumonia. There is now mass public resistance to the vaccinations and medical passports. This is probably why they rushed out the vaccines in the span of 6 months instead of a year to 18 months, as they hinted at in early 2020. They are trying to get as many people as possible to take the experimental vaccines before the citizenry realizes that COVID is a nothing burger. I can say that in my area, the majority of people never wore the masks, and the majority of local businesses never tried to enforce them. And though they initially went along with the first economic shutdown, they will not be complying with another. In my state of Montana, there are 1,300 deaths attributed to COVID. In my county, the estimated infection rate is over 25%, which means almost everyone has probably already been infected, and there are only 13 deaths total. No one is scared of this thing. Almost no conservative is going to wear a mask, and many people in red states, and some in blue states, are going to refuse to take the vaccines or accept medical passports. This means that the globalists have a big problem. They obviously invested a lot into this pandemic. It is the key to their entire reset agenda. Without a frightening pandemic killing tens of millions, the globalists will not be able to lock down the public and prevent them from traveling or organizing. They will not be able to institute the medical passports and contact tracing apps that would allow them to watch the public 24/7. They certainly won't get most Americans to go along with the cashless society and the centralized global governance the elites are so obsessed with. The fear of coronavirus is waning. The globalists have indeed failed in epic fashion. But this doesn't mean that they are going to give up. If my experience studying psychopathic people tells me anything, it is that when these lunatics are cornered, they tend to double and triple down on their failures. The question is, what will happen next? The establishment will need maximum instability and chaos in the near term if they hope to salvage their reset project. If they wait too long, awareness will spread and they might not get another chance for many decades to come, if ever. Here are the events I expect to see over the course of the next year. COVID mutation hype. And before I get into this portion of it, I'll say that we indeed have already seen this, have we not? Mutations, Ebola, Zika. Oh, we got to fire up those old viruses and potential pandemic scares of old, don't we? We need to drum up a little fear. What do you got? What's in the playbook? In any case, the globalists are doomed unless they can keep the pandemic panic rolling forward. For now, puppets like Biden and Fauci are going to pretend as if a full reopening of the economy is going to happen. This is a lie. Already we are seeing Biden waffling on when a reopening will take place. He has indicated that it will be at least a year before the shutdowns will completely end. And this is predicated on the majority of Americans submitting to vaccinations and medical passports. In other words, the establishment is telling us that they intend to hold the economy hostage until we take the jab and give up our freedoms. Now, are these inbred totalitarians just out of their minds? Well, probably, but that doesn't mean they don't have a plan B. Just look at all the hype surrounding COVID mutations in places like South Africa and Brazil. The narrative will be that a new COVID variant that is more dangerous and deadly than the first virus is spreading, and that the lockdowns must return for the greater good of the public. As a recent article from The New Scientist states, existing vaccines should stop people getting severely ill and dying if they do get infected from the P1 variant. However, because many people remain unvaccinated, plans to ease lockdown restrictions would have to be rethought if this variant causes a resurgence in case numbers. Plus, any variant that circulates widely will have more opportunities to evolve into a more dangerous form. The New Scientist does not seem to understand basic science. The overwhelming majority of viruses circulating in the world usually evolve into less deadly forms of their original iteration. Viruses need to survive too, and they don't do this by mutating into more and more deadly monstrosities that kill their favorite hosts. There is still no evidence that the new COVID mutations are any threat whatsoever, but the establishment is already staging the narrative that new lockdowns are coming. Federal lockdowns. If the mutation narrative continues on the path it seems to be following, then I expect the Biden administration to attempt a national federalized lockdown, similar to the level 4 lockdowns used in Europe and Australia, and it will be announced sometime this year. This program will trigger several reactions. Most importantly, most conservative states and counties will refuse to follow federal mandates. I know that my county, and probably most of Montana, will defy any new shutdown. There will be several economic consequences that will erupt from this conflict, some positive and some negative. Domestic economic warfare. This phase of the crisis will happen within a month to 2 months of any national shutdown. Red states will refuse to comply. State politicians, even if they are part of the agenda, will be too scared to try to enforce federal mandates. They'll be compelled by the conservative citizenry to keep their states open. Most people in these areas will ignore mandates. This will lead to a red state fiscal boom, at least in the beginning, as businesses continue to thrive in conservative areas while blue states suffer under medical tyranny. Companies will flee leftist states by the thousands and move to any states that remain open and accommodating. This will be short-lived, though. Biden and the federal government will try to retaliate, first by cutting off federal funds to any state that does not bow to their power and refusing to give stimulus to any businesses that relocate. Blue states will be flush with stimulus cash, while red states will be forced to reduce or eliminate welfare programs and some pension funds. Of course, the government has no real money to give. They only have our tax dollars and the fiat that the central bank creates from thin air. The likely response will be that the conservative states and the citizens will simply stop paying federal taxes. Another reaction will be red states taking over federal lands and utilizing the resources on those lands to rejuvenate their industry and make up the federal dollars lost. What this amounts to is a soft secession of conservative regions, which will eventually lead to federal attempts at physical intervention. The economic war will turn into a shooting war, and the argument from the establishment will be that conservatives are putting the rest of the country quote-unquote at risk, that we are selfish and literally killing grandma. Yeah, wait for it, folks. Wait for it. And of course, if you don't play along, well, guess what? You don't get the federal dollars that were just passed out in the boondoggle $1.9 trillion mess to, pay off the blue states and cities that wreaked havoc because of the George Floyd stuff all last year. That's how it works. Complete erasure of conservatives from the internet. I expect Biden and big tech to further pursue their current witch hunt against conservative voices, far beyond what we have already seen. In order to win a fight with the conservatives, they will first have to silence us so that our side of the argument is never seen or considered by the rest of the population. If they allow us to be heard, we will undoubtedly win because facts and moral reason are on our side. It is hard to demonize people that simply want to be free. But if you can silence conservatives and moderates, then the narrative can be rigged. The establishment spin doctors can tell people that we don't actually want freedom. We want something else, something evil and nefarious. They can tell people we are fascists, and that we are racist, and that we actually want tyranny. Who is going to tell the public otherwise when we are removed from all available platforms and our websites are booted off service providers due to dangerous ideas? Gun control madness. I know that some people think that leftists under Biden will not try to carry out a widespread gun crackdown, and that much of the current talk is merely hollow rhetoric. I disagree. I think the globalists are going for broke, and they need to get as many combat-capable firearms as they can from Americans soon. Democrats will push hard for legislation like House Resolution 127. They will then offer a compromise with Republicans and the NRA, cutting out portions of the bill. This will be a trick to make the public think that the new restrictions are a reasonable compromise. They think we'll breathe a sigh of relief and say, well, at least they didn't take everything. The gun grabbers are delusional. What will really happen is millions of gun owners will pass local and state laws negating federal restrictions. No conservatives are going to give up their gun rights, allow red flag laws to be implemented, or allow high-capacity firearms to be limited. Not at this stage in the game. International intervention. Eventually, leftists and the establishment will realize that conservatives will be harder to subjugate than they expected. They will discover that a large part of the U.S. military and law enforcement is on our side. They will start to see mutiny among the people that they rely on as cannon fodder to carry out their diktats. Even now, there are sheriff's departments across the country refusing to enforce lockdown orders. And 30% to 50% of medical professionals say they will not be taking the COVID vaccine depending on the state. When the rebellion goes live, this is when the globalists will have to pursue extreme options. They will not be able to win using domestic forces. Instead, they will seek an international response, probably through the Blue Helmets, aka the United Nations. The rationale will be that the U.S. has an enormous nuclear arsenal, and that the international community cannot allow these weapons to fall into the hands of white supremacists. This is when the real fight will begin. If international intervention fails in the U.S., the globalists will find their heads on the chopping block. If the globalists win the fight in the U.S., then there will be very few people left to resist them in the years going forward. I have had numerous readers from all over the world write to me saying that they believe in the face of the pandemic lockdowns, it is now all up to Americans to turn the tide. I agree. A successful rebellion against globalism in America will lead to rebellions elsewhere. But the fact remains that if we lose, no one else will dare to lift a finger. The future is in our hands. So an interesting synopsis here laid out by old Brandon Smith over at Alt Market, laying it out as to what he thinks may play out here this year. Are we falling right into this pattern at this point? It's hard to say, but we'll have to keep a close eye on this, certainly. Yeah, truly hope our military kicks out Biden. He did not get the 82 million. Yeah, it remains to be determined at this point. Remains to be determined. All right, so over to the Gatestone Institute. How democracy dies. Big tech becomes Big Brother. So let's break this one down. Digital giants have been playing an increasingly significant role in wider society. How well does this monopolism correlate with the public interest? Russian President Vladimir Putin said on January 27, 2021. Where is the distinction between successful global businesses, sought-after services, and big data consolidation on the one hand, and the efforts to rule society by substituting legitimate democratic institutions, by restricting the natural right for people to decide how to live, and what view to express freely on the other hand? Was Mr. Putin defending democracy? Hardly. What apparently worries him is that the big tech might gain the power to control society at the expense of his government. What must be a nightmare for him, as for many Americans, is that the tech giants were able to censor news favorable to Trump, and then censor Trump himself. How could the U.S. do this to the president of a great and free country? Putin made these comments at the Davos World Economic Forum, in which he and Chinese President Xi Jinping sped on by the Great Reset of a fourth industrial revolution, used enlightened phrases to mask dark plans for nation-states and a globalist new world order. Thus did Xi caution attendees to adapt to and guide globalization, cushion its negative impact, and deliver its benefits to all countries and all nations. In March 2019, Putin signed a law imposing penalties for Russian internet users caught spreading fake news and information that presents clear disrespect for society, government, state symbols, the Constitution, and government institutions. Punishments got even heavier with new laws in December. Meanwhile, opposition leader Alexei Navalny has been sentenced to prison for more than 3 years, with a year off for time served, in part because he revealed photos of a lavish Russian palace allegedly belonging to Putin on the coast of the Black Sea. Its accoutrements supposedly include an $824 toilet brush. Many of the thousands of people protesting Navalny's imprisonment have since been protesting Putin by waving gold-painted toilet brushes. How nice that American big tech companies is pushing democracy in Russia, even while it is denying it at home. You notice how many leaders in Europe have risen to condemn censorship in America, even though many in Europe are censoring their citizens as well, and are not exactly fans of the person who is being censored, former President Donald J. Trump. Like Putin, they probably do not want big tech competing with their governments either. The power sharing of the U.S. federal government with big tech appears a recipe for unharnessed power and corruption. Navalny caught on right away, saying, "This precedent will be exploited by the enemies of freedom of speech around the world. In Russia as well. Every time when they need to silence someone, they will say, 'This is just common practice.' Even Trump got blocked on Twitter." What watchdog, if any, is now restraining big tech in America? It has become quite clear that big tech censorship may well have cost Trump the election, even if one ultimately finds that election fraud did not. Big tech took it upon itself to censor an expose published by the New York Post on October 24, 2020, as well as follow-up exposés reporting that Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, had sold his influence to China and Ukraine and had raked in millions for the family. The Media Research Center found that 1 of every 6 Biden voters we surveyed, about 17%, said they would have abandoned the Democratic candidate had they known the facts about one or more of these news stories. That information might well have changed the outcome in all 6 of the swing states Biden reportedly won. Last August, Twitter also undertook censoring of the trailer of an explosive documentary entitled The Plot Against the President. The film, narrated by Rep. Devin Nunes, with commentary by leading members of the Republican Party, exposes leading members of the Democratic Party and their deep state allies, many of whom knowingly used phony evidence to frame President Trump and some in his circle to try and convince Americans that he and his campaign had colluded with the Russian government to win the 2016 election. The film claims, using with recent declassified information, that President Barack Obama, as well as HRC, were involved in an almost 4-year attempted coup incomparably more undemocratic than any riot at the Capitol building on January 6th. Rep. Devin Nunes, the top Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, claimed in August 2020 that Biden also knew of the ongoing efforts to unseat Trump. Nevertheless, Trump did not target them, perhaps to avoid dividing the country even further. According to the Washington Times, the Twitter account of the movie, which debuted in October 2020, attracted 30,000 followers. Twitter blacklisted it for a day, but after a public uproar, put the popular documentary back. Our question is, how many blacklistings did Twitter not put back? The January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol was a pivotal event for Trump and the Republican Party. Prior to January 6th, President Trump had offered to deploy 10,000 troops to the Capitol, according to his former Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. The Pentagon and Department of Justice had also offered help, but were also reportedly turned down by the U.S. Capitol Police. The problem, apparently, was optics, about a Capitol now surrounded by barbed wire and thousands of troops, which the current administration now seems to like. Freedom of Information Act requests for further details about the event were also rejected. It is not clear by whom. It is ridiculous, therefore, for anyone to frame the riots, ugly as they were, as a seditious, quote-unquote, insurrection, particularly in light of what appears to be a massive security failure that could have averted the violence. One thing is certain, the timing of the event could not have been more perfect for opposition groups, which is probably why it had been planned for weeks before January 6th. What these efforts and the media did achieve was an end to all attempts to ascertain election fraud at a time when Vice President Mike Pence was counting electoral college ballots and allowing speeches from those supporting that claim. Some politicians even called for the resignation of Senators Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley and referred them to the Ethics Committee for even suggesting an election audit of battleground states, despite questions having been asked with no objections concerning the results of the 2000, 2004, and 2016 presidential elections. Ultimately, the result of that latest witch hunt against President Trump, as it has been called, was a contrived impeachment attempt to bar Trump from a future presidential bid, a kangaroo court devoid of due process, hearings, witnesses, and evidence. The prosecution, however, was undeniably eloquent in evoking democracy for a totally undemocratic procedure that justly resulted in Trump's acquittal. Meanwhile, Facebook and Twitter banned Trump and some of his supporters from their cyber domains. An alternative social media platform, Parler, was banned from the Apple and Google app stores, and then completely closed down by Amazon. Meanwhile, mainstream social media platforms were reportedly used to rally and carry out riots in American cities last year. No one was penalized. Do not, however, expect such slackness now, according to Fox News. People like Obama-era CIA Director John Brennan and Rep. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have made various public statements labeling Republicans as extremists, with Ocasio-Cortez claiming the GOP has white supremacist sympathizers within its ranks, and Brennan claiming domestic violent extremists in the form of far-right supporters of President Trump are more dangerous than Al-Qaeda. Columnist and radio host Jeffrey Cooner warns that a new bill, House Resolution 350, is the liberals' equivalent of the Patriot Act Redux. This time, however, it is not aimed at Islamic jihadists. Rather, it directly targets Trump patriots. Cooner writes that the bill has the full backing of the Democratic congressional leadership, the Biden administration, big media, and big tech. And that's House Resolution 350 for those keeping track at home. The bill empowers the deep state to monitor, surveil, and spy on American citizens' social media accounts, phone calls, political meetings, and even infiltrate pro-Trump or stop the steal rallies. Conservatives who are deemed potentially seditious or treasonous can be arrested and jailed, fined, and or lose their employment. The goal is simple: to crush all dissent to the Biden regime. Moreover, last month, the new Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, ordered a stand-down of the entire military for 60 days, so each service, each command, and each unit can have a deeper conversation about this issue, extremism. Normally, stand-downs last only a few hours or days and do not involve the entire military. Austin, in addition, has pledged to rid our ranks of racists and extremists. These are words that can be applied to anyone dreamed up, including Trump supporters, and based, of course, on nothing but propaganda. Austin's plan is therefore needless, divisive, and dangerous, considering the foreign dangers now circling their prey. This punishment of the regime's foes makes one wonder what is next. Are we already marching in lockstep with Russia and China? The way to unite and strengthen the United States is not through suppression and punishment, but through political power with checks and balances, a free press, and closer adherence to the Constitution. But, here, again, there seems to be a problem. The Federalist wrote in July, according to a new Quillette survey released last month, 70% of self-identifying liberals want to rewrite the U.S. Constitution to a new American Constitution that better reflects our diversity as a people. Oh, so that is what we lack? Diversity. What can Americans do? We are presently at a tipping point in America. Communist China is working hard and is focused on global domination. We're just messing around. In an increasingly digital world, the war against infringements on our freedoms most probably needs to be fought largely in the digital and cyberspace. That is why ending censorship in both the traditional and social media is such an important priority. First, break up the big tech companies. Let them become the utilities they originally claimed to be, or else be liable to lawsuits as other publishers are. We do take some comfort that whereas dictatorships in authoritarian countries such as China and Russia is vertical, from the top down, in America the central government shares power with the states from the bottom up, and with powers separated, the executive, the judiciary, and the legislative. Fortunately, governors such as Ron DeSantis in Florida, Greg Abbott in Texas, and Kevin Stitt in Oklahoma are now moving legislatively to counter federal laws that may have adverse effects on freedom of speech, jobs, election integrity, the energy industry, the First or Second Amendments, and general constitutional rights. This does not speak, however, to the major issue here, that democracy cannot survive in a country where a few technocrats and oligarchs can choose to deny access to information or platforms to candidates running for office. It is simply unacceptable that they alone, unelected, unappointed, untransparent, and unaccountable, can deem what is harmful to society. The job now for all of us is to prevent the United States from slowly becoming a full-blown tyranny. Lenny Friedman Valenta, a graduate of Brandeis and Yale, has written articles for the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, Gatestone Institute, etc., etc. That's who penned this particular article. So there you have it. That's our task before us. Yes, we're seeing the states stand up against the mandates, the diktats, the legislative tyranny that is being pushed at us. And the appropriate response at this point is indeed the 10th Amendment. Rally behind your states. Get behind your legislators. Do everything possible. Get geared up. We are in this fight for the long haul, folks. Alright, how we doing out there? You guys doing alright? Barred by Twitter, no explanation given. Yeah, welcome to the club, John Lipinski. Granted, I've always been a gabber, but nonetheless, we deal. Alright. So, last but not least on the evening, how many of you guys caught Michael Flynn's piece here in recent days? Put an op-ed out. We're going to read through that here, because I think it's also fitting to what's been covered here this evening. Kind of shores everything up neatly. Western Journal had this yesterday, I believe. It says, exclusive from General Flynn. 5 lessons I learned when the deep state came after me and my family. You do not have to watch the news for long to see that America is rapidly changing. The downward slide can be found not only in our leadership, but also in the shifting definitions of right and wrong blindly accepted by many Americans today. Our leaders would have us believe that these changing values are inevitable and that they are good. That is why they are called progressive. Yet to those of us who still believe in the immortal truths upon which America was founded, their so-called progress is alarming, to say the least. Sadly, some will allow this alarm to grow into defeatism. They will turn their faces away from the battle before us in hopes of finding a position to retreat to. To those who would prefer retreat or surrender rather than the fight, I ask you one simple question. If America falls, where will you go? Where will you go to find another nation that provides the opportunities and individual guarantees of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Where will you find a nation whose founding documents guarantee a government of, by, and for the people? Name a place that offers you and your family the same or more than our United States of America. The answer is simple. There is no such place. In spite of our downward slide, America is still the best nation on the face of the earth. This is our land. These are our people. These are our cities, neighborhoods, and streets. This is our country. Though the battle for the soul of America is fierce before us, we cannot afford to look away in hopes of finding retreat. There will be none. Though I may sound pessimistic, I am anything but. God enabled me to endure a years-long campaign by the left to destroy me and my family. They wanted me to serve as an example to anyone who would defy the entrenched bureaucrats of the swamp. Despite their best efforts, I stand before you as living proof that victory is absolutely possible. The very fact that we are gathered here today as American citizens, free to speak and peaceably assemble, should fill us with hope. But being hopeful is not a survival plan. Hope has never won a war, nor will it win peace on the home front. In this article, it is my intention today to share with you a few lessons I learned in my battle against the dark forces that still threaten our nation today. When fighting for truth, the most important place to start is to be well grounded in the truth itself. I am referring to truth with a capital T, as in, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Faith in God is an essential part of the fight to restore American greatness. Our personal faith is inextricably linked to our personal liberties. Alexis de Tocqueville, the great French author of the groundbreaking work Democracy in America, wrote, "Upon my arrival in the United States, the religious aspect of the country was the first thing that struck my attention. The Americans combine the notions of Christianity and of liberty so intimately in their minds that it is impossible to make them conceive the one without the other." De Tocqueville is exactly right. Prior to America's founding, no document in the world had directly linked the individual rights of citizens to their unique value and autonomy before an omnipotent creator. We should not try to commemorate our founders' willingness to pledge their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor, without also acknowledging the faith that served as the foundation for such boldness. Faith and freedom can never be separated from one another. If you wish to have boldness in the fight for America, like our founding fathers did, have faith in Almighty God. Trust in His power as your sword and your shield. I must confess that I am rarely one to wear my faith on my sleeve, but fighting with the deep state taught me just how faithful our God is. Even when so many of my friends and colleagues abandoned me, God never did. In fact, going through those trials only brought Him closer. Make faith an essential part of your battle strategy today. As we root ourselves in faith, we must also root ourselves in the writings of our founding fathers. If we are to preserve the legacy of such great men as George Washington, John Adams, and Patrick Henry, we must also know what they stood for. Anyone can learn more about our nation's founding. Start simple. When was the last time you read the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence? We tend to forget just how easy it is to read the Constitution from cover to cover. President Obama's Affordable Care Act was more than 314,000 words long, but the document that frames our entire system of government is only 4,500 words in length. The average American can read it in a half an hour. Of course, if we really want to go into the mindset of our founding fathers, we must dig deeper. The Federalist Papers, the Tocqueville's Democracy in America, Paine's Common Sense, and the writings of John Locke are all well worth the read. America's conception was indeed miraculous, but it was far from accidental. The men who met in Philadelphia were bold men of faith and character who risked everything to secure the blessings of liberty. We must learn of their sacrifice, and we must honor it. The great pamphleteer Thomas Paine eloquently wrote in his The American Crisis that what we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. Those words were read to the entire Continental Army by order of General George Washington, but they still apply equally to us today. Freedom requires the sacrifices of every generation. As we build upon our faith and a clear understanding of our founding documents, we must never forget the importance of our family in the stand for truth. When no one else would stand by my side, my wife Lori was there, just as she has been since we met at 13 years old. I married my high school sweetheart in 1981, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made. Lori has been my rock on a sea of uncertainty. The same strength of character and conviction that made her an amazing Army wife has also equipped her to withstand the political battles of the past few years. She is my best friend. I count myself blessed beyond measure to have her by my side. There is a reason why the forces of darkness are trying so hard to eradicate the family as we know it. They see how powerful the bond of family can be, so they want to redefine it, water it down, and replace it with a dependency on the state. We cannot allow them to destroy the family. As long as marriages and families are strong, freedom will always have a fighting chance. Never concede to those who say they know how to raise your children better than you do. God entrusted the care of children to parents, not to governments. As Ronald Reagan famously said, freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than a generation from extinction. Take Reagan's words to heart as you train up your children. Your fight for freedom today will mean nothing if the next generation does not know how to keep it. Do not think of the fight to protect our families as distinct from our fight to save America. The fight to protect the family is a cornerstone of our fight to save America. It is unlikely that anything else you do in life will be as important or as meaningful. Looking again to our forefathers, we see that they acted courageously for the sake of our future generations. We see their concern for their children and their children's children in everything they said and did. Benjamin Franklin urged ratification of the U.S. Constitution with the reasoning that, for the sake of our posterity, we shall act heartily and unanimously in recommending this Constitution wherever our influence may extend, and turn our future thoughts and endeavors to the means of having it well administered. When you fight for America, remember that you are fighting for your family, moms, dads. Make that a guiding light when you do battle against the forces of darkness. After building the importance of family upon the foundation of faith and the founding, patriots must come to see the importance of true friendship. John Adams called friendship, quote, one of the distinguishing glories of man. From this I expect to receive the chief happiness of my future life, end quote. When I became the favorite target of the left for the crime of helping candidate Trump win the presidency of the United States, and then serving as his first national security advisor, I was abandoned by many who said they were my friends. Those who I had previously spent time with suddenly stopped calling, texting, and engaging with me and my family. Only when I needed them most did they reveal their true colors. To be honest, I felt betrayed. Yet, it was during these dark days that I discovered that I had more friends than I ever realized. Letters began pouring in from every corner of the nation, and in some cases, from around the world. These letters, many of them from Christians and patriots I had never met, contained words of encouragement, funds for my legal defense, and offerings of prayers on my behalf in my darkest hours. These were the expressions of true friends. I was so moved by these thousands of friends that I made it my mission to thank every one of them. I still treasure their letters to this day. You may not receive thousands of letters of encouragement, as I did, but you should think now about who your true friends are. If you're going to fight the battle for liberty, you must ask yourself whether the people you depend on are going to be with you when the going gets tough. Remember, you are not alone. There are many other Americans like us who want to defend our great national heritage, but those who stand against us want to divide in order to conquer us. Don't let them get away with it. Find your true friends and stand with them boldly. We can win this fight if we work together. So far, I have told you the importance of faith, addressed our nation's founding, and spoken to the importance of family and the value of true friendship. These are the elements I have found to be vital when everything else seems stacked against you. Now, I would like to talk about the fight. America needs fighters today. We need those who will say, as President Andrew Jackson did, "I was born for a storm, and a calm does not suit me." We need those who will stand against failed Marxist ideologies that have invaded the mainstream of our consciousness like a network of choking vines, seeking to strangle the mighty American oak tree. These vines manifest themselves through social media censorship of the free exchange of ideas, mainstream messaging that drives toward thought control, political correctness designed to force behavioral compliance, the selective application and weaponization of the very ideals, laws, and institutions designed to protect us, large-scale attacks on the family and on patriotism itself. These problems are big problems, but you do not have to be some DC superstar to be part of the solution. Victory can be achieved through the coordinated efforts of many people doing small but courageous acts of patriotism. Start by reaching out to those around you. Be an outspoken voice in your church and community. You will be amazed how many hearts and minds can be swayed just by calmly, intelligently, and respectfully presenting a viewpoint outside of what is said in mainstream news. Next, make it your goal to be where the action is taking place. It is commonly said that history is made by those who show up. Take the time to go to meetings at City Hall. Be a presence at your local school board meetings. Get to know your state's legislators, and keep on top of what is going on at your state's capital. Don't just complain about how elections are not conducted fairly. Be a part of the solution by petitioning or lobbying at whatever political level that suits you to strengthen election integrity laws. Contact your local party precinct about volunteering as a poll watcher. Remember, the most powerful office in the world is not the President of the United States, but on any given election day, it is determined in patriotic precinct volunteer. If your local officials refuse to stand for what is right, employ the ultimate weapon of the grassroots activist. Tell them that you will run against them and follow through on it. Every politician at every level fears nothing more than the possibility of losing their power. Even if the odds are stacked against you in your township or district, a strong showing from conservatives can keep your officials from straying too far to the left in the future. However you decide to get involved, make the decision today. America needs soldiers in the fight for freedom. No one is coming to rescue us from our problems. Some think that the judiciary will solve all of our problems, but they have proven themselves to be unreliable at best. Rather than waiting for someone else to fight for us, we must be willing to do what the hard work ourselves. The forces arrayed against us are great. They have money, power, and privilege on their side. They want to force the neck of every hard-working American into the yoke of servitude and taxation. They want to force our mouths into the muzzle of big tech censorship and cancel culture. They want to take our children from us, forcing them to look to Big Brother government rather than those who truly love them. Yet, for all their plans and power, the forces of darkness can still be defeated. A friend recently gave me an interesting new perspective on a familiar chapter in American history. Remember that General George Washington commanded a small band of patriots against the greatest military force on the planet? My friend said his Continental Army was outtrained, outgunned, and outnumbered by the British regulars. The Redcoats were a hardened and well-disciplined army, against whom Washington's ragtag volunteers were no match. The colonies were divided over the war. Congress was practically dysfunctional during the most critical period, and in the infamous 1778 winter encampment at Valley Forge, Washington's 11,000-man army nearly dissolved from starvation, disease, and discouragement among the ranks. We all know how the story ended. Against all odds, the Americans beat the British and formed the greatest nation in world history. It wasn't strokes of luck, but divine providence that made this possible. President Washington later charged his fellow Americans that we ought to be no less persuaded that the propitious smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right which heaven itself has ordained. As today's patriots, we fight for those same eternal rules of order and right. No matter what anyone says, the character of righteousness has not changed. Those rules were established before the foundation of the world, affirmed by our great founding fathers, and maintained by every American generation up to this critical chapter in our history. With these eternal truths at stake, will you fight with me now in the cause of freedom? We will be counted among those who cared enough to pass the torch of freedom to a new generation while it still burns bright. There can be no retreat and no surrender. As I asked before, where will you go if America falls? Our battleground is here. Our shield is faith. Our sword is truth. Victory is ours if we do not cower in the face of evil and oppression. Will you join the fight? For the sake of our children and grandchildren, I pray you will. God bless America. And those were some words penned by General Flynn here recently. Take that to heart, folks. The fight is now. It is before us. We know we wrestle not against flesh and blood, against principalities, powers, rulers of the darkness of this age. It is here. It is now. It is the time. There is nowhere to run. There is no other place. Period. You either confront it and walk through it, or you die trying. So there you have it, folks. Leave you on that note here this evening. And of course, I'm happy to see that Mr. Flynn talked about the Federalist Papers, which yours truly is covered. You can find on my archive channel that is cataloged, archived. You can go into the playlist, go through all the various Federalist Papers, go through the Constitution, go through the Declaration of Independence. One I did not consider, perhaps maybe I will. If you guys wish, you guys can leave comments underneath the video, what have you, once this is done. Maybe I should go through Alexis de Tocqueville's book. I'd thought about it at one time. I've read through it in the past, and it's been a while. But maybe that'd be worth a read, just to have that on record as well. So, alright, well, that is going to do it for this evening's broadcast. Appreciate you guys tuning in for a fireside here on this lovely evening here in the middle part of flyover country. Good night for it. Return to the old logs and that on the old fire here. Get out of the house. No more fireplace. Cut that puppy down. And of course, we will be back here tomorrow on the 5x5 channel at our regularly scheduled time. You can join us then, kicking off at 3 p.m. Eastern. And we'll have our traditional lineup at play tomorrow. So, that being said, I appreciate you guys tuning in, as always, regardless of what platform you're on. Thank you again to the folks over at the Foxhole app, DLive, Twitch, YouTube, while we're still there. Thank you. And we will see you back here again tomorrow. Take care. God bless, everybody.